Have you ever walked into a room you practically paid for, only to have the person at the door ask to see your janitor's badge? It's a specific kind of weight, isn't it? A weight that doesn't care about the digits in your bank account or the title on your business card. I'm sitting here today, looking out over the skyline of a city that I've helped build, and I can't help but think about how thin the line is between being a king and being a suspect in this country. Before we get into the heart of what happened on that flight, I want to ask you something. Where are you listening to this from? Whether you're in a crowded subway in New York or a quiet living room in Chicago, drop a comment and let me know. And if you've ever felt like an outsider in a place you earned the right to be, hit that subscribe button, because we've got a lot to talk about. This isn't just a story about a flight. It's a story about the skin we live in and the invisible walls they build around us. The day started like a dream. You know those mornings where the sun hits the glass just right, and you feel like you can finally breathe. At 9:00 a.m., I was standing in a boardroom on the 50th floor of a skyscraper in Manhattan. I was wearing a bespoke, midnight blue Italian wool suit, $5,000 of craftsmanship that felt more like a suit of armor than a piece of clothing. I looked in the mirror and saw a man who had come a long way from the boy who grew up in a drafty house in Detroit. A boy who watched his father work 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. That morning, I signed the final papers for a merger that would effectively give my holding company control over one of the largest regional airlines in the United States. It was the culmination of 20 years of grinding, of being the first one in and the last one out, of navigating a world that wasn't designed for people who look like me. I felt untouchable. I felt like I had finally reached the summit. But the thing about the summit is that the air is thin, and people start looking for reasons why you shouldn't be there. I had a celebratory dinner planned in Los Angeles, so I headed to JFK. I could have taken a private jet. Heaven knows the company has enough of them. But I've always liked the energy of a commercial airport. There's something about the hum of people going places, the shared anticipation of a journey. Or maybe, deep down, I still wanted to see if the world would treat me differently now that I was somebody. The first crack in the armor happened at security. I'm a clear member. Pre-check. The whole 9 yards. I walked up to the kiosk. My Patek Philippe watch catching the light. My posture straight. The TSA agent, a young white man with eyes that looked like they hadn't seen a friendly face in years, didn't even look at my face. He looked at my hands. Then he looked at my suit. Then he looked at my ID. He held it up to the light for a second. Too long. His thumb rubbing against the plastic as if he expected the ink to smudge. Step aside for a random screening. "Sir," he said. His voice was flat, devoid of any please or thank you. I felt that familiar tightening in my chest, the black tax being collected in real time. I looked at the line behind me. A dozen white businessmen in wrinkled khakis and polo shirts were breezing through, their laptops already in the bins. I was the only one pulled aside. I looked at my watch. I had plenty of time. But that wasn't the point. The point was the eyes. The way the people in line suddenly averted their gaze, as if my random search confirmed a suspicion they didn't even know they had. The agent began the pat-down. His gloved hands were cold against my neck. He ran his fingers along the waistband of my trousers, lingering on the expensive fabric. He didn't speak. He just moved me like I was a piece of luggage, a thing to be inspected. I stood there, arms out, eyes fixed on a sign across the terminal advertising luxury vacations, while the heart-shattering pain of being reduced to a stereotype began to seep through the wool of my jacket. I thought about the board meeting. I thought about the $4 billion deal I had just closed. And then I thought about how none of it mattered to this man who was checking my socks for contraband. "You're good to go," he finally said, stepping back and gesturing toward the exit with a jerk of his chin. No apology for the delay. No acknowledgement of the dignity he had just tried to peel away. I gathered my things, my hands shaking just a fraction as I put my watch back on. I walked toward the airline's flagship lounge, trying to shake it off. "Don't let them win," I told myself. "You're the boss now. You own the chairs they're sitting in." But the feeling followed me. It's like a shadow that doesn't disappear when the lights come on. It just gets sharper. When I reached the lounge entrance, I handed my black Centurion card to the receptionist. She was middle-aged, blonde, with a smile that looked like it had been painted on with a very stiff brush. She took the card, looked at it, and then looked at me. Her smile didn't waver, but it changed. It became the kind of smile you give a child who's playing dress-up. "I'll need to see your boarding pass as well, sir," she said. "This lounge is strictly for first-class passengers and top-tier members." "Of course," I said, my voice low and steady. I pulled up the digital pass on my phone. 1A, the very first seat on the plane. She scanned it, her eyebrows twitching just a millimeter. She handed the card back. But she didn't say welcome, Mr. Harrison. She just nodded toward the buffet. "We'll announce when your flight begins boarding." I found a corner of the lounge that was quiet. Tucked away behind a glass partition, I ordered a glass of scotch, the good stuff. The kind that costs more per pour than I used to make in a week during college. I sat there, trying to focus on the notes for my dinner speech, but the air in the lounge felt heavy. It was a space filled with the elite, the 1%, and yet I felt like a ghost haunting a house I had built. I watched the other travelers, men in expensive loafers, women with designer bags, and I realized they all looked at me with the same expression. Curiosity mixed with a hint of, how did he get in here? I finished my drink and decided to head to the gate early. I needed to move, to feel the floor under my feet. Walking through the terminal, I felt the eyes tracking me. It's a sensory thing you develop when you've lived this life. You can feel the weight of a gaze on the back of your neck. You can hear the slight hush in a conversation as you pass by. I kept my head high, my steps measured. I was wearing the suit, but I was also wearing 20 years of having to be twice as good to get half as far. When I got to the gate, the boarding process was already starting. The agent called for global services and first class. I stepped forward, falling into line behind an older white couple who were dressed in matching tracksuits. They looked comfortable, relaxed. They belonged. As I stood behind them, the woman turned around, saw me, and instinctively pulled her purse a little closer to her body. She didn't even realize she did it. It was muscle memory. I felt a surge of bitterness, but I swallowed it. I had a job to do. I had a company to lead. I reached the gate agent, a young woman who looked exhausted. She scanned my pass. The machine gave a high-pitched beep of approval, and she waved me through without looking up. I walked down the jet bridge, that long, echoing tunnel that bridges the gap between the world, you know, and the world of the sky. The smell of jet fuel and recycled air hit me, a familiar scent that usually brought me a sense of excitement. But today, it felt clinical. Cold, I stepped onto the aircraft. The carpet was plush. The lighting was a soft, ambient blue. To my left was the cockpit, a hive of glowing buttons and serious men. To my right was the first-class cabin, 8 seats, wide and leather-bound, each a private island of luxury. Standing in the galley was a flight attendant. Her name tag read Sarah. She was tall, with sharp features and hair pulled back into a bun so tight it looked painful. She was handing out pre-departure water and champagne to a man in 2B. Her voice was like honey, sweet, light, and welcoming. "Here you are, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice trilling. "Can I get you anything else before we push back?" "A pillow, a blanket. I'm fine, Sarah. Thank you," the man replied, not even looking up from his Wall Street Journal. I moved toward my seat. 1A. I placed my leather briefcase in the overhead bin, making sure to handle it carefully. It contained the merger documents, the physical proof of my victory. As I closed the bin, I turned to Sarah. I wasn't expecting the honey voice, but I expected the basic professional courtesy I'd paid for. She looked at me. The honey vanished. Her face became a mask of bureaucratic indifference. It was as if a shutter had been pulled down over a window. "Sir, boarding is still in progress for the main cabin," she said. Her voice was several degrees colder than it had been for the man in 2B. "You'll need to keep the aisle clear so the other passengers can get to their seats." "I know," I said, my voice calm. "I'm in 1A. She didn't move. She didn't offer to take my coat. She didn't ask if I wanted a drink. She just stared at me for a beat, her eyes scanning my suit, my shoes, and finally my face, as if she were looking for the flaw in the disguise. "I'll need to see your boarding pass again," she said. "Just to be sure, I just showed it at the gate," I replied. I could feel the heat rising in my neck, that dangerous simmer that I've spent a lifetime learning to suppress. "And the seat is right there." I pointed to the empty chair directly in front of me. "Policy is policy." "Sir," she said, her voice sharpening. She crossed her arms, her posture becoming defensive. "I need to verify that everyone is in their assigned cabin. It's a security matter." I stood there in the narrow aisle, the sounds of the boarding passengers behind me growing louder, the murmurs of the main cabin people as they shuffled past, their bags bumping against my shoulders. I felt like a boulder in a stream, an obstacle to be moved. I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the cold metal of my phone. I pulled it out, unlocked it, and held the screen inches from her face. 1A, first class, confirmed. She looked at the screen, then back at me. There was no "oh, I'm so sorry, Mr. Harrison." There was no welcome aboard. There was only a thin, tight-lipped nod. "Fine," she snapped. "Sit down, and keep your feet out of the aisle. I have a lot of passengers to serve, and I don't need any tripping hazards." I sat down in the leather seat, the expensive wool of my trousers sliding against the hide. I stared straight ahead at the bulkhead wall, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I could hear her moving in the galley, the clinking of glass, the soft laughter as she spoke to another passenger. I was the ghost again. I was the invisible man in the most expensive seat on the plane. I reached out and gripped the armrests, my knuckles turning ash gray against the black leather, as I felt the engines under the floor start to whine, the vibration traveling through my boots and into my bones. The ground finally fell away, leaving us suspended in that strange, pressurized limbo where the world below looks like a toy set and the problems down there are supposed to vanish. But as the landing gear retracted with a heavy thud, the weight I was carrying didn't lighten, it just shifted. I felt the G-force pressing me back into the leather of 1A, a seat that cost more than my first car, yet I felt like a stowaway. Have you ever been in a place where every physical comfort is provided, but the atmosphere is so thin you can't catch a full breath? That's what first class feels like when you're the only one who looks like you. It's a velvet-lined cage. I stared out the window as we pierced through a layer of gray clouds into the blinding, unfiltered sunlight of 30,000 feet. It's beautiful up here, isn't it? Up here, the sun doesn't care about the lines we draw on maps or the shades of our skin. It just glows. I tried to wrap myself in that peace. Tried to let the hum of the twin turbines drown out the ringing in my ears from the interaction at the gate. I opened my laptop. The screen glowing with the spreadsheets and legal jargon of the merger. Focus on the wins. I whispered to myself, look at the numbers. The numbers don't lie. The numbers say you belong. But then, the curtain rustled. It's just a piece of fabric. That curtain between the galley and the cabin. But when Sarah pulled it shut, it sounded like a cell door locking. She began her rounds. I watched her from the corner of my eye. She was a professional. I'll give her that. She moved with a practiced grace, a choreographed sequence of smiles and nods. She reached seat 2B, Mr. Sterling, the man with the Wall Street Journal. Mr. Sterling, she chirped, her voice skipping like a stone over water. I have that sparkling water you like, with 2 limes, and I've laid out the warm nuts for you. Is there anything else? A hot towel, perhaps. I watched him grunt a reply without looking up, and she beamed at him as if he'd just handed her a Pulitzer Prize. Then, she turned toward me. The transformation was instantaneous. The light in her eyes didn't just dim, it went out. The smile didn't fade, it was retracted, like a tape measure snapping back into its case. She didn't walk to my seat, she marched to it. She didn't ask if I wanted a drink. She didn't use my name. She just stood there, clutching her tray like a shield, looking at the top of my head while I pretended to be deep in an email. Sir, she said, the word hitting like a cold pebble. I'm going to need you to stow that laptop for the meal service. It's a safety hazard. I looked up. Slowly. The person behind me has their tablet out, and the gentleman in 2B is still using his laptop. I said, my voice as level as a carpenter's tool. Is the safety hazard specific to my seat? She didn't blink. She didn't even acknowledge the logic. I'm asking you to stow it, sir. Now, I felt the tax being deducted from my soul again. That's what I call it. The black tax. It's the extra energy you have to spend just to stay calm when someone is trying to bait you into being the angry black man they've already decided you are. If I raise my voice, I'm a threat. If I stand up, I'm a predator. If I demand the same service as Mr. Sterling, I'm difficult. So, I paid the tax. I closed the laptop. I tucked it into the seat pocket. Thank you, she said. But it wasn't a thank you. It was a victory lap. She walked away without offering me a drink. I sat there, my hands empty, my tray table deployed like a landing strip for a plane that was never going to arrive. I looked over at Mr. Sterling. He was sipping his sparkling water, his laptop still open, his screen filled with stock tickers. Sarah walked past him again, adjusted his air vent for him, and shared a quiet laugh about the weather in LA. I leaned my head back and closed my eyes, trying to travel back in time to my father's garage. My dad was a mechanic. He spent his life under the bellies of cars, his fingernails permanently stained with grease that no amount of orange soap could ever fully remove. I remember him telling me, "Son, you're going to have to wear a suit just to get the respect a white man gets in his pajamas. And even then, they'll think you stole the suit." He was right. Here I was, in the suit, in the best seat, in the middle of a multi-billion-dollar life. And I was still that boy in Detroit, wondering why the lady at the grocery store followed him down every aisle. It's an exhausting way to live. It's like running a marathon with a backpack full of lead, while everyone else is sprinting on a track made of air. I pressed the call button. I just wanted a glass of water. My throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper. The ding echoed through the quiet cabin. Sarah was at the back of the galley, talking to another flight attendant. I could hear their muffled voices. A stray word here and there, entitled, "Wrong cabin." Suspicious. They weren't even trying to be quiet. She didn't come. I waited 2 minutes, then 5. I pressed it again. This time, she appeared at the curtain, her face flushed with a dark, simmering irritation. She didn't walk over. She just leaned her head in. "Is there an emergency?" "Sir, no emergency," I said, keeping my tone conversational, the way I do when I'm negotiating a contract. "I would just like some water, sparkling or still. It doesn't matter, just something to drink. I'm in the middle of preparing the meal service for the entire cabin." She snapped, "I'll get to you when I have a moment. You're not the only person on this aircraft." She disappeared back behind the curtain. I looked at the one A stitched into the leather beside my head. I thought about the signature on the merger papers. I thought about the fact that, technically, as of 4 hours ago, I was her boss's boss. But in this moment, at 30,000 feet, she held all the power. She was the gatekeeper of a plastic cup of water, and she was enjoying the hell out of the gate. I tried to distract myself by looking at the in-flight magazine, but the images of luxury watches and Caribbean villas felt like a cruel joke. I felt a tap on my shoulder. I flinched, just a little, and turned around. It was the man in 1B, a middle-aged guy with a kind face and a rumpled linen shirt. "Hey," he whispered, leaning across the console. I saw that. That was uncalled for. "Do you want me to say something? I've got extra water in my bag if you're thirsty." I looked at him, and for a second, the wall I've built around myself cracked. I saw empathy, real, human empathy. But then the survival instinct kicked in. If he stood up for me, it would only make her more defensive. It would turn into a situation. And a situation always ends with the black man being met at the gate by local police. "I appreciate it," I said, giving him a tight, professional smile. "But I'm fine. Really. I'm used to it." He looked at me for a long beat, his eyes searching mine. And then he slowly nodded and sat back. "That's the problem, isn't it?" he muttered to himself. "That you have to be used to it." He was right. That is the problem. 10 minutes later, the smell of heated airline food filled the cabin. It's a specific smell, salty, metallic, and vaguely artificial. Sarah began rolling the cart out. She served 1B his salmon. She served 2A his steak. She served 2B his pasta. She moved like a ghost around me. Her body contorted in such a way that she never had to face me directly. When she finally reached 1A, there was only one tray left on the top of the cart. It was the special meal, the vegetarian option I had ordered weeks ago. She picked it up, but she didn't set it down. She held it just out of my reach. "I'm going to need to see your ID one more time," she said. I stared at her. "My ID? For a meal? There's been a report of a discrepancy in the manifest," she said, her voice dropping into a low, conspiratorial hiss. "We need to make sure the person in this seat is actually the person who booked it. There have been issues with fraudulent upgrades lately." The cabin went silent. Even the hum of the engines seemed to fade. I could feel every eye in first class burning into the back of my head. She was accusing me of being a thief, in front of everyone. She was stripping me naked in a room full of people who already doubted I belonged there. I felt a coldness wash over me, not the coldness of the air conditioning, but the coldness of a man who has reached his limit. I didn't shake. I didn't raise my voice. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out my wallet, and extracted my driver's license and my company ID. I set them on the tray table. "My name is Marcus Harrison," I said, each syllable a heavy footfall. "I am the CEO of Harrison Global Holdings. I am in seat 1A because I paid for it. Now, give me my food." She looked at the IDs. She didn't look at my face. She snatched them up, turned them over, and then tossed them back onto the table. She didn't apologize. She didn't acknowledge the title. She just slammed the tray down in front of me, the plastic cover rattling against the porcelain plate. "Enjoy your meal," she said, the words dripping with sarcasm. She turned to go back to the galley to get the beverage cart. I watched her go, my heart pounding against my ribs, the adrenaline making the world look sharp and jagged. I picked up my fork, but my hand was trembling. I looked down at the food, a sad pile of wilted greens and gray pasta, and I realized I couldn't eat. The tax had taken my appetite. 2. I reached for the napkins Sarah had left on the cart as she passed by, but as she turned the corner with a fresh pot of steaming black coffee, the plane hit a sudden, violent pocket of turbulence. The aircraft lurched to the left, a sharp, gut-dropping dip that sent a few loose items flying. Sarah lost her footing. She stumbled toward me, the heavy glass pot in her hand tilting precariously as she tried to catch her balance against my seat. I looked up, my eyes wide, as a wave of dark, scalding liquid began to pour over the rim of the pot, straight toward the center of my chest. The heat hit me before the reality did. It was a sharp, stinging bloom of liquid fire that soaked through the lapel of my midnight blue blazer and raced toward my skin. I remember the sound it made, a soft, heavy thwack as the contents of the pot found their mark, followed by the hiss of steam rising from the expensive wool. My body went into a state of immediate, primitive shock. You know that split second where your brain hasn't quite decided if you're supposed to scream or stay silent. I just sat there, my hands frozen on the armrests, watching the dark stain spread across my chest like a shadow taking over a sunny day. It wasn't just the temperature that burned. It was the suddenness of it, the way the world narrowed down to the sensation of that wet, scalding weight. The fine Italian weave I'd chosen so carefully that morning was now ruined. A $5,000 armor pierced by a careless hand and a bit of shaky air. But as the sting began to turn into a deep, throbbing ache, I looked up. I expected to see a face full of horror. I expected a "oh my God, I'm so sorry," or a frantic reach for napkins. I expected the basic human reaction you give when you've accidentally hurt someone. But Sarah wasn't looking at me with horror. She was looking at me with a twisted kind of irritation, her jaw set tight, her eyes scanning the floor where a few stray drops had landed on the carpet. She didn't drop the pot. She didn't gasp. She just stood there, swaying slightly as the plane leveled out, and let out a long, theatrical sigh. It was the sound you make when a child spills milk on a clean floor, a sound of inconvenience, not regret. "You really should have kept your area clear, sir," she said. Her voice wasn't just cold anymore, it was jagged. If your legs hadn't been so far into the aisle, I wouldn't have tripped. Now look at this mess. I felt a coldness settle in my stomach that was the exact opposite of the heat on my chest. I looked down at my legs. I was tucked into my seat, my feet nowhere near the aisle. I looked back at her. She was actually blaming me. The person who had just been doused in boiling liquid was being lectured by the person who held the pot. It's a trick as old as time, isn't it? When you can't justify the harm you've done, you turn the victim into the villain. You make the pain their fault. I wasn't in the aisle. "Sarah," I said. My voice was a low rumble, The kind of tone I use when a deal is going south, and I need everyone to know I'm not playing games. And you haven't even apologized. Apologized. She scoffed. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping so only I could hear it. But her eyes remained wide for the rest of the cabin to see. I'm the one who has to go get a cleaning kit now. I have a whole cabin to serve. And you're making this difficult. You need to go to the lavatory and handle that. I don't have time to be your personal maid. The silence in the first-class cabin was thick enough to choke on. I could feel the eyes of the other passengers. Mr. Sterling in 2B had lowered his paper. The man in 1B, the one who had offered me water, was staring at Sarah with his mouth hanging open. But no one said a word. In that moment, the luxury of the cabin felt like a courtroom where I was already guilty. I was the disruption. I was the problem. If I reacted, I was the angry man. If I stayed quiet, I was the doormat. I looked at the stain. It was a deep, ugly brown, spreading across the white of my undershirt now. The heat was subsiding into a dull, raw irritation against my skin. I thought about the board meeting that morning. I thought about the power I held in those skyscrapers. I thought about the fact that I could probably buy this entire plane if I wanted to. But here, in the sky, I was nothing more than a nuisance to a woman who saw my skin before she saw my humanity. The pain in my chest wasn't just from the coffee anymore. It was that old, familiar ache, the heart-shattering pain of knowing that no matter how much you achieve, no matter how high you climb, there are people who will always try to pull you back down to the ground. They don't want your success. They want your submission. They want to see you break. I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger, not the loud, explosive kind. It was a quiet, icy resolve. It was the feeling of a man who had spent 20 years playing by the rules, only to realize the rules were rigged. I realized that the suit wasn't my armor. My armor was my dignity, and I was done letting her chip away at it. I'm not going to the lavatory, I said, my voice carrying just enough to reach the second row. You're going to get me a towel, and then you're going to get the lead flight attendant. Sarah's face went from pale to a blotchy, angry red. She gripped the handle of the coffee pot so hard her knuckles turned white. Excuse me, she hissed. Are you telling me how to do my job? I told you to go clean yourself up. You're being disruptive, and I won't have it. I'm being disruptive. I asked, a bitter laugh escaping my throat. I'm sitting here with a burn on my chest from a mess you made. And I'm asking for basic service. If I were Mr. Sterling, you'd be on your knees with a cloth right now. That was the trigger. She didn't like the truth. She hated that I had named the thing that was happening. She leaned back, her eyes darting to the other passengers, as if looking for witnesses to a crime I hadn't committed. That's it, she said, her voice shaking with a fake kind of fear. I feel threatened. You are being aggressive. Sir, I'm going to have to report this to the captain. Go ahead, I said. Report it. Tell him exactly what happened. Tell him you spilled hot coffee on a passenger and then refused to help him. I'm calling for an air marshal, she snapped, her voice rising so the whole plane could hear. She was performing now. She was playing the frightened woman against the threatening man. You need to stay in your seat and do not move. If you stand up, I will consider it an assault. I sat there, the wet wool of my blazer heavy and cold against my shoulders now. The transition from heat to cold was complete. I looked around the cabin. Mr. Sterling had gone back to his paper, his shoulders hunched as if trying to disappear. The man in 1B looked like he wanted to speak, but he was staring at his lap. The isolation was total. Have you ever felt that? That moment where you realize you're completely on your own. Even in a room full of people. It's a lonely place to be. But it's also a place where you find out who you really are. I wasn't that scared kid from Detroit anymore. I wasn't the man who would apologize for being hurt just to keep the peace. I looked at the 1A on the wall again. It looked like a joke now. A front row seat to my own humiliation. Sarah retreated behind the curtain. Her movements hurried and jerky. I could hear her on the intercom. Her voice low and urgent, using words like unruly and safety risk. I didn't move. I didn't reach for my laptop. I just sat there, staring at the closed curtain. My heart was a drum in my ears, a steady, heavy beat that matched the vibration of the engines. I felt the eyes of the passengers in the rows behind me, the main cabin people who were probably wondering what the big man in the suit had done to cause such a stir. The raw sting on my skin was a reminder of the reality of the situation. I wasn't a CEO right now. I wasn't a success story. I was just a target. But as I sat there, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. It was the calm that comes after the storm has already hit. The worst had happened. She had tried to shame me. She had tried to hurt me. And now she was trying to use the law to silence me. I realized then that the only way to win this game was to stop playing by her rules. She expected me to yell. She expected me to get up and demand my rights so she could point the finger and call me a criminal. But I wasn't going to give her that. I was going to give her the one thing she didn't expect. The truth, backed by a power she didn't even know existed yet. I reached up and slowly, methodically, began to unbutton the ruined blazer. Each button felt like a deliberate act of defiance. The midnight blue wool fell away, revealing the white dress shirt underneath, now stained a muddy brown. I didn't stop there. I started unbuttoning the shirt, my fingers steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. From behind the curtain, I heard the heavy click of the cockpit door opening. I heard the firm footsteps of the captain. I heard Sarah's voice. Higher now, more frantic. He's in 1A. He's been difficult since the moment he boarded. He's refusing to follow instructions. I didn't look up when the curtain pulled back. I didn't look up when the captain, a tall man with graying hair and a face carved from granite, stepped into the cabin. I just kept my eyes on my own hands as I pulled the damp, stained dress shirt off my shoulders, exposing the simple black t-shirt I was wearing underneath, the shirt I always wore under my business clothes for luck. The captain stopped. I could feel his gaze land on me. I could feel Sarah standing behind him, probably with a smirk on her face, waiting for the takedown. But as I sat there, bare-chested in the first-class cabin of a plane I now technically owned, I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like the storm. I looked up at the captain, my eyes locking onto his. The silence that followed was heavier than the air pressure outside. Captain Miller, that was the name on his wings, didn't move for what felt like an eternity. He stood there, framed by the blue light of the cabin and the pale, trembling figure of Sarah behind him, looking at me like I was a puzzle he couldn't solve. I was sitting there, half-dressed in the most expensive seat on his aircraft, with a pile of ruined Italian wool at my feet. I could see his eyes darting from my face to the golden logo on my black t-shirt. Then back to my eyes. He was waiting for the aggression Sarah had promised him. He was waiting for me to lung, to shout, to give him a reason to use the flex cuffs he probably had tucked in his pocket. But I didn't give him that. I didn't give him anything but the truth of my presence. "Captain," I said, and my voice sounded different even to me. It wasn't the voice of the man who had been asking for water 10 minutes ago. It was the voice of the man who had spent the last decade deciding the fate of thousands of employees. It was a voice that didn't need to be loud to be heard. I believe your flight attendant has a report to make. Why don't we let her finish?" Sarah took that as her cue. She stepped forward, her voice high and brittle, like glass about to shatter. "Captain, he's been hostile since boarding. He refused to show ID. He's been blocking the aisle. And when I accidentally tripped during the turbulence, he became verbally abusive. He's threatening the safety of this cabin. I want him removed at the next stop." Miller looked at her, then back at me. He was a man trained to assess threats, but he was also a man who had seen a lot of the world. He looked at the coffee stain on the floor. He looked at the raw, red skin on my chest that was starting to blister slightly under the edge of my t-shirt. Then he looked at the man in 1B, the one who had offered me water. "Is that how it happened?" the captain asked, directed at the passenger. The cabin held its breath. 1B cleared his throat, his eyes flicking to Sarah and then to me. "Actually, Captain, the gentleman was sitting right here. He never left his seat." She spilled the coffee, didn't apologize, and told him to clean it up himself. He's been nothing but patient, more patient than I would have been. The air seemed to leave Sarah's lungs in a hiss. She turned on the passenger, her face contorting. "You weren't watching. You were sleeping. I was awake the whole time," 1B said, his voice gaining strength. "And frankly, the way you've treated this man is the most unprofessional thing I've seen in 20 years of flying." Captain Miller's posture shifted. He wasn't looking for a fight anymore. He was looking for a way out of a disaster. He looked back at me, his brow furrowed. "Sir, I apologize for the incident with the coffee. We have a medical kit, but Sarah says you're being difficult about the manifest. Can you explain the shirt?" I leaned back, feeling the cool leather against my bare skin. "The shirt, Captain, is the corporate seal of Sky Truth Holdings. You might not recognize the name yet, but you will. At 9:00 a.m. this morning, in a boardroom in Manhattan, I signed the closing documents that made Sky Truth the majority shareholder of this airline. My name is Marcus Harrison. I am the chairman. And technically, Captain, you're flying my plane." The color didn't just leave Miller's face, it evaporated. He looked like he'd been struck by lightning. He looked at the logo again, the stylized eagle and the globe, and I saw the moment the gear turned in his head. He'd probably seen that logo on the internal memos for weeks. The new ownership headers that everyone usually ignores until the checks start changing. Sarah, however, hadn't caught up. She let out a sharp, jagged laugh. "CEO, you don't lie to the captain. You're probably a mid-level manager who bought a fake shirt at a conference." I didn't even look at her. I reached into the seat pocket, pulled out my phone, and tapped a single contact. I put it on speaker and held it up. It rang once. Marcus. The voice was crisp, authoritative. It was the CEO of the airline, the actual CEO, the man who reported to me as of 4 hours ago. "I thought you were in the air. Is everything okay? We're still on for the LA gala tonight, right? Everything is fine. Jim," I said. My eyes locked on Captain Miller. Miller's jaw had dropped so far I thought it might hit the deck. "I'm just having a bit of a service issue on Flight 442. It seems there's some confusion about the culture of excellence we discussed during the acquisition. I have a flight attendant here who thinks the first-class cabin is a place for profiling and hot coffee showers." The voice on the other end went deadly silent. "Who is the lead on that flight?" "I'll get back to you on that." "Jim, I'm currently speaking with Captain Miller. He's being very professional. We're just clearing up a few discrepancies. I'm so sorry. Marcus, give Miller the phone. Now." I handed the phone to the captain. His hand was shaking as he took it. Yes. Sir. Yes. Mr. CEO. I understand. No, sir. I'm handling it. Yes. I see him now. I am so sorry. Sir. Miller handed the phone back to me like it was a live grenade. He turned to Sarah, and the look in his eyes was one of pure, unadulterated fury. Sarah, get out of this cabin. Now. Go to the back and stay there. You are relieved of your duties for the remainder of this flight. But, Captain, she wailed, her voice cracking. I said now. Miller roared. She turned and fled behind the curtain, the sound of her heels clicking frantically away until the galley door slammed shut. The cabin was silent again, but the energy had changed. It wasn't the silence of judgment anymore. It was the silence of awe. Captain Miller knelt down in the aisle. He actually knelt, so he was lower than me. Mr. Harrison, I don't know what to say. There is no excuse. I saw a situation, and I trusted my crew, but I should have seen the man. I am deeply, deeply sorry. We will have an ambulance waiting at the gate for those burns, and I will personally ensure that Sarah is dealt with according to the highest level of disciplinary action. I looked at him, and for the first time since boarding, I felt a sense of peace, not because I had won, but because for the first time, I was being seen. I don't want her fired. Captain, I said quietly. Miller blinked. Sir, I want her retrained, I said. I want her to spend a month working in the service centers in the neighborhood she's clearly afraid of. I want her to learn that a suit doesn't make a man, and the lack of one doesn't break him. I want her to understand that every person in every seat on this plane is a human being first, and a passenger second. If she can't learn that, then you can fire her, but give her a chance to see the world she's been living in. Miller nodded slowly, a look of genuine respect crossing his face. You're a better man than most. Mr. Harrison, I'll make sure it happens. He stood up, offered me a crisp salute, and retreated back to the cockpit. The man in 1B reached over and squeezed my arm. That was something else. Man, thank you for standing up. Not just for yourself, but for the truth. I spent the rest of the flight in that black t-shirt. I didn't put the ruined blazer back on. I sat there, looking out the window at the sunset over the Rockies, the orange and purple light bleeding across the sky. I thought about my father. I thought about the grease under his fingernails and the way he used to straighten his back when he walked into a bank. Even when he knew they wouldn't give him the loan, I realized that the armor I'd been wearing all these years wasn't the suit. It was the resilience he'd bred into me. Money and titles are just tools. They can buy you the seat, but they can't buy you the respect. That has to come from a place deeper than a bank account. It has to come from the refusal to be diminished. As we began our descent into Los Angeles, I looked at the golden logo on my chest. It was just a piece of screen-printed ink, but it represented a change in the wind. It represented a world where maybe, just maybe, the next kid from Detroit won't have to buy the whole damn airline just to get a cup of water. I want to leave you with a thought today. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to prove your worth to someone who didn't want to see it? How did you handle it? Drop a comment below and let's start a conversation. We need to hear these stories. We need to remind each other that we belong in every room we walk into. And if this story touched you, if it reminded you of your own power, hit that subscribe button. We're building something here, a community of people who know that the sky isn't the limit, it's just the beginning. I stood up as the plane taxied to the gate, the pain on my chest a dull reminder of the day's cost. I didn't wait for the all clear. I just gathered my ruined clothes. looked at my reflection in the dark window of the cabin, and smiled. I wasn't just a CEO. I was a man who had finally taken off the mask and found that the person underneath was more than enough. I walked toward the exit, my head held high, stepping out into the California sun as the doors opened to a world that looked exactly the same, but felt entirely different. I've spent half my life making sure my tie was straight and my shoes were shined to a mirror finish, just so nobody would have an excuse to look down on me. I've built a company from the ground up, sweat through the nights, and navigated boardrooms where I was the only face that looked like mine. You'd think that after 20 years of success, after earning a seat at the table, heck, after owning the table, the world would finally stop trying to put me in my place. But you know what they say, brother. You can't dress up the truth for people who are committed to seeing a lie. It doesn't matter if you're wearing a $3,000 suit or a tattered hoodie. To some people, you're just a shadow they're afraid of, or a problem they need to solve. I'm sitting here right now, looking out at the rain hitting the tarmac, and I feel this weight in my chest. It's a heavy thing, like a stone that's been sitting there for a lifetime. I needed to tell you this because I think you're the only one who'd really get it. Before I get into the thick of what happened on that flight, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching this from today? Drop a comment and let me know. It helps me feel like I'm not just talking to myself in this empty lounge. And if you've ever felt that sting of being judged before you even opened your mouth, hit that subscribe button. We've got to keep these stories alive. Man, we've got to keep our voices loud. It started at JFK, Terminal 4. The place was a madhouse, a sea of people rushing to get somewhere, everyone lost in their own little worlds. I was heading to Napa for a weekend of checking on the harvest, something I do every year. I was feeling good. My company had just closed a major deal. My kids were doing great in school, and for a moment, I felt like I was actually winning. I was standing in the first-class boarding lane, just scrolling through some emails on my phone, minding my own business. I had my briefcase tucked under my arm, looking like every other executive in that terminal, or so I thought. Then came the gate agent. Let's call her Tiffany. She had this sharp, pinched look on her face, like she'd just smelled something sour. She was checking the tickets of the people ahead of me, a white couple in golf shirts, a businessman in a blazer. She was all smiles with them. Have a wonderful flight. Mr. Henderson, safe travels, folks. Then, it was my turn. I stepped up, my boarding pass in my hand, ready to go. She didn't even look at the pass at first. She looked at me. Not a greeting, not a smile, just a cold, hard stare that went from my shoes up to my face and back down again. Sir, the main cabin is boarding from the other lane, she said. Her voice was flat, like she was reading a sign. I looked at her, then back at the sign above us that clearly said, First Class, Diamond Medallion. I felt that first little prick of heat in my neck. I know, I said, keeping my voice steady. I'm in first class. She didn't move. She didn't reach for the pass. This lane is for premium passengers only. Sir, you'll need to wait for your zone to be called in the general boarding area. I took a breath. I've been through this dance 1,000 times, but it never stops hurting. It's like a paper cut on your soul. Small, but it stings every single time. I held the boarding pass out, right under her nose. I'm in 1A. Tiffany, I believe that qualifies as premium. She finally took the pass, her fingers barely touching mine, as if she were afraid whatever I had might be contagious. She scanned it, her eyes narrowing as the machine gave that little ping of confirmation. She looked at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. She didn't apologize. She didn't say, "Oh, my mistake." She just handed it back with a stiff jerk of her wrist. "You can proceed," she muttered, already looking past me to the next person in line. I walked down that jet bridge, and I could feel the eyes of the people behind me. I felt like I was on display, like I'd just been accused of something and cleared on a technicality. You know that feeling. When you haven't done a single thing wrong, but you still feel like you have to walk a little straighter, act a little whiter, just to prove you belong. It's exhausting. Mon. It's a mental tax we pay every single day. When I stepped onto the aircraft, I was hoping for a bit of peace. First class is supposed to be a sanctuary, right? You pay for the legroom, the quiet, and the service. But the moment I crossed that threshold, the air felt different. It was cold, not just the air conditioning, but the atmosphere. There was a flight attendant standing there, Linda. She was the picture of professionalism on the surface, but I've learned to read the lines around people's eyes. She was welcoming the passengers ahead of me with this bubbly, over-the-top energy, taking their coats, offering them pre-flight champagne, making sure they were comfortable. When I walked up, that bubble burst. She didn't offer to take my coat. She didn't even say hello. She just pointed toward the back of the plane. "Coach starts at row 12. Sir, please keep the aisle clear for the first-class passengers." I stood there for a second, just letting the words hang in the air. I looked at seat 1A, my seat, which was right next to us. It was empty, waiting for me. I looked at the man in 1B, who was already sipping a glass of bubbly, watching the whole thing with a look of mild curiosity, like he was watching a documentary on National Geographic. "I'm in 1A, Linda," I said. I made sure to use her name, just like I did with Tiffany. I wanted her to know I saw her as a person, even if she wasn't doing the same for me. Her face went pale for a split second, then turned a blotchy, angry red. She didn't offer a drink. She didn't offer to help with my bag. She just moved aside with a huff. "Fine. Sit down. I'll be back with the safety briefing." I sat down, and the leather of the seat felt like ice. I tried to focus on my work, but I could hear her in the galley, whispering to the other flight attendant. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew the tone. It was the tone of someone who felt put out. Someone who felt like the natural order of things had been disturbed, because a man who looked like me was sitting in the best seat on the plane. As we waited for the rest of the plane to board, I watched her. I watched her bring a warm towel to the woman in 2A. I watched her laugh with the guy in 2B. Every time she passed me, she looked the other way. It was like I was invisible, yet somehow also a glaring eyesore she was trying to ignore. It's a strange thing, being both seen and unseen at the exact same time. You're a problem to be dealt with, but not a human to be served. Once we reached cruising altitude, the real service began. Or rather, the lack of it. Linda came down the aisle with the drink cart. She was leaning over the white passengers, her voice soft and melodic. "Would you like to try our signature reserve? It's a beautiful Cabernet from a small estate, truly the pride of our wine list." I watched her pour a deep, rich red liquid into their glasses. I could smell it from my seat, the scent of dark berries, earth, and toasted oak. It was a familiar smell, a smell that meant home to me. When she got to me, she didn't show me the bottle. She didn't talk about the notes or the estate. She just reached for a bottle that was tucked away in the back of the cart, something I hadn't seen her serve to anyone else. She poured a splash into a glass and set it down on my tray table with a clink that was just a little too loud. "Here," she said. The red blend. I looked at the glass. The wine was thin. It was a pale, watery purple, almost translucent around the edges. It looked like the kind of stuff you get at a bad wedding or out of a box in the back of a pantry. I didn't even have to taste it to know it was wrong. "Linda," I said, stopping her as she tried to move on to the next row. "What exactly is this?" She didn't even turn around fully. "It's the red wine, sir, like you asked." "No," I said, my voice low and steady. "I saw the bottle you poured for the gentleman in 1B. This isn't the same wine." She finally turned back, her arms crossed over her chest. "Well, we're out of the premium bottle. This is what we have left. It's all the same anyway, isn't it? I'm sure you'll find it perfectly adequate." Adequate. I repeated the word. It tasted like ash in my mouth. "You think I can't tell the difference?" She gave me this look, a look of pure, unadulterated condescension. It was the look that said, "I know you don't belong here. I know you're just playing a part, and I'm going to make sure you know it, too, sir. Most people in your position aren't usually this picky about the vintage," she said. The way she said "in your position," it was like a slap in the face. She didn't have to say the word. We both knew what she meant. I felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp, but I pushed it down. I've spent 20 years learning how to turn that anger into something else. I've learned that when people try to make you feel small, the best thing you can do is show them just how big you really are. I picked up the glass. I swirled it slowly, watching the way the light hit the thin, cheap liquid. I brought it to my nose. It smelled like vinegar and mass-produced chemicals. It was an insult, not just to me, but to the craft of winemaking itself. I took a small sip. It was worse than it looked. It was sharp, acidic, and completely lacking in any character. It was a $10 bottle of swill being served in a cabin where the tickets cost $5,000. "You know," I said, leaning back in my seat and looking her straight in the eye. "My father was a janitor. He spent 30 years cleaning floors in a building that he wasn't allowed to enter through the front door. He used to tell me that the world would try to give me the scraps and expect me to be grateful for them. He told me that my job was to never, ever accept the scraps." Linda rolled her eyes. "Look, if you're going to make a scene over a glass of wine, I can call the captain. We don't tolerate disruptive behavior in first class. I'm not making a scene, Linda," I said. "I'm having a conversation about quality. You see, I happen to be an expert on this particular subject. I can tell you that this wine is a low-grade blend, likely from a high-yield industrial vineyard in the Central Valley. I can also tell you that its alcohol content is roughly 12.5%, which is well below the 14% required for the Cabernet that is supposed to be served on this flight." She laughed, a real, mocking laugh. "An expert, right? And I'm the Queen of England. Just drink your wine and be quiet, sir." I didn't blink. I didn't raise my voice. I just reached into my briefcase and pulled out a small, leather-bound portfolio. I opened it and took out a business card. I didn't hand it to her. I laid it on the tray table, right next to that pathetic glass of wine. "My name is Marcus Sterling," I said. "I'm the CEO of Sterling Global. But more importantly, for the purposes of this conversation, I am the owner of Sterling Legacy Vineyards. We are the exclusive supplier of the premium Cabernet for this airline's first-class cabin." The silence that followed was absolute. It was like the engines of the plane had suddenly cut out. Linda's eyes dropped to the card. I saw her read the name. I saw her eyes go to the logo, the same logo that was embossed on the premium bottle she was holding in her other hand. I saw the moment the realization hit her. It wasn't a slow dawning. It was a physical blow. Her face went from red to a ghostly, sickly white. The hand holding the bottle started to shake. Just a little bit at first, and then enough that the glass clinked against the cart. She started, but the words died in her throat. You thought you were serving a man who didn't know better, I said, my voice like cold iron. You thought you could save the good stuff for people you felt deserved it, and give the trash to the man who didn't fit your image of a first-class passenger. But you made a very big mistake. Linda, you served the owner of the vineyard a glass of his own competition's cheapest waste. And you did it while insulting my intelligence and my heritage. The man in 1B had stopped pretending to read his book. He was staring at Linda with a look of pure shock. The woman in 2A was peeking over her seat, her mouth slightly open. The entire cabin was frozen. Caught in the gravity of the moment, I looked at the wine again. This wine doesn't just represent a bad vintage. Linda, it represents a choice. Your choice. You decided that I wasn't worth the truth. You decided that because of the color of my skin, I was someone who could be cheated, someone who could be silenced with a shrug and a lie. Mr. Sterling, I didn't know, she whispered. Her voice was thin, trembling. That's the problem, isn't it? I said. You only treat people with respect when you think they have the power to take it from you. But respect isn't something you give to a title. It's something you give to a human being. And you failed that test today. Spectacularly. I stood up. I'm a big man, and when I stand to my full height in that cabin, I take up a lot of space. I could feel the tension radiating off her, a mix of fear and desperation. She looked like she wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. We were 30,000 feet in the air, and she was trapped in a prison of her own making. Call the lead purser, I said. It wasn't a request. It was a command. Tell him that Marcus Sterling is on board, and we need to have a very serious discussion about the integrity of your service and the violation of my company's contract. She didn't move for a second. She just stood there, staring at me, her chest heaving as she struggled to breathe. I could see the tears starting to well up in her eyes, not tears of sorrow, but tears of a bully who had finally been backed into a corner. Now, I said, my voice echoing in the quiet cabin. She turned and stumbled toward the galley, her hands fumbling with the curtain. I watched her go, and for a moment, I didn't feel the triumph I expected. I just felt a deep, soul-aching weariness. I was tired of fighting. I was tired of proving I existed. I was tired of the fact that even at the top of the mountain, the air was still thick with the same old poison. I sat back down and stared at the glass of thin, purple wine. I reached out and took the glass, not to drink it, but to hold it. I felt the vibration of the plane through the stem, a constant, rhythmic thrumming that felt like a heartbeat. My heartbeat! I was still here. I wasn't going anywhere. The curtain to the galley flicked open, and a tall man in a dark blue uniform stepped through. He looked around the cabin, his eyes landing on me, and then on the shaking woman standing behind him. I set the glass down on the tray table, the pale liquid sloshing against the rim, and waited for him to reach my seat. Robert, that was the name on the silver plate pinned to his chest, didn't walk. He glided. He had that practiced, neutral expression that they teach you in corporate training. The kind of face that's supposed to say, I'm listening, while actually saying, I'm calculating how to make you go away. He looked from me to Linda, then down at the tray table where that sad excuse for a wine sat, shimmering under the harsh LED cabin lights like a puddle of oil. The air around us felt thick, like we were suddenly underwater. The hum of the jet engines, which usually sounds like a lullaby to a frequent flyer like me, now felt like a low growl from a beast waiting to pounce. "Is there a problem here, Mr. Sterling?" Robert asked. His voice was smooth, like polished stone, but there was no warmth in it. He didn't look at the wine. He looked at me, his eyes scanning my face, my suit, my posture, looking for a reason to dismiss me. I didn't answer him right away. I let the silence stretch out. In business, silence is a weapon, if you can sit in it without flinching. You've already won half the battle. I looked at Linda, who was practically vibrating with a mix of fear and indignation. She was leaning against the galley wall, her hands clenched so tight her knuckles were white. She looked like she wanted to scream, but she knew the cameras were rolling, so to speak, even if it was just the eyes of the other passengers. "Robert," I said. Finally, I let his name hang there. "Your colleague here seems to think that because of the way I look, my palate is as unrefined as the swill she just poured into this glass. She's been telling me, and the rest of this cabin, that you're out of the premium Cabernet, the very Cabernet that my company, Sterling Legacy, provides to this airline." Robert's mask didn't slip, but I saw a tiny flicker in his pupils. Just a millisecond of No. He turned his gaze to Linda. "Linda, is this true? I thought we were low on stock." "Robert," she stammered, her voice an octave higher than it had been. I didn't want to run out before the meal service was over. I grabbed a bottle from the back. It's still a good wine. It's a red blend. Most people don't even notice. Most people, I interjected. I picked up the glass. "You see, Robert, that's where the lie falls apart. Because I don't just notice wine. I live it. I know the chemistry of every grape that leaves my soil. And I can tell you, without a shadow of a doubt, that this liquid here isn't just a different brand. It's an insult to the contract I signed with your board of directors. Sterling Legacy Cabernet is a 14, 5% alcohol by volume vintage. It's bold, it's structured, and it has a specific density. This watery mess is barely 12%. It's a high-production, low-cost filler wine. It's the kind of stuff they serve at cheap conventions to save a buck. And yet, here I am, in seat 1A, having paid for the best, being told that I'm not worth the bottle I actually own. I could see Robert's mind working. He wasn't thinking about social justice. He wasn't thinking about how I felt. He was thinking about the lawsuit. He was thinking about the fact that I wasn't just a passenger. I was a major vendor. I was a man who could pull a multi-million-dollar contract from under their feet before we even landed in California. "Mr. Sterling, I'm sure this was just a misunderstanding," Robert said, finally finding his voice. He tried to put on a conciliatory smile, but it looked more like a grimace. "Linda is one of our most senior staff members. I'm sure she didn't mean to—" "Stop," I said. I didn't raise my voice, but the word cut through his excuse like a hot knife through butter. "Don't do that. Don't hide behind misunderstanding. We both know what this is. We both saw her face when I walked onto this plane. We both heard the way she talked down to me before she even knew I had a ticket for this cabin. This isn't a mistake. It's a choice. It's the same choice people have been making about me my entire life." I looked out the window for a second. The sun was starting to set, casting long, orange streaks across the clouds. It reminded me of the first time I set foot on the land that would become my vineyard. It was a dusty, neglected patch of earth in Napa that nobody wanted. The old money families laughed when I bought it. They said a black man from Brooklyn didn't know the first thing about soil or fermentation. They thought I was just a rich guy playing at being a farmer. I remember standing in that red dirt, feeling the heat of the sun on my back, and knowing that I had to work 10 times harder just to be taken seriously. I spent 3 years just studying the drainage. I slept in a trailer on that land while I was building the brand. I poured every cent, every ounce of my soul into those vines. And when the first bottle finally came out, when it won double gold at the state fair, those same people who laughed were suddenly asking for an invitation to my tasting room. They didn't see the sweat. They didn't see the nights I spent worrying if a frost would kill my dreams. All they saw was the success, and even then, they acted like it was a fluke, like I'd stumbled into it by accident. That's what hurts the most. Brother, it's not the name-calling. It's not the blatant hatred. It's the subtle, constant denial of your worth. It's the way they look at you and decide you don't belong in the room, even when your name is on the door. It's the way Linda looked at me and decided I was adequate for the trash, while the man next to me deserved the treasure. I want to see the manifest. Robert, I said, turning my attention back to the purser. I want to see how many bottles of Sterling Legacy were loaded onto this flight. And I want to see the bottle Linda currently has in her hand. Robert hesitated. Mr. Sterling, that's really not necessary. I can just bring you a fresh bottle right now. I'll open it myself. No, I said. You don't get it. This isn't about me getting a glass of wine. I have thousands of cases of this wine in my cellar. I can drink it whenever I want. This is about the fact that your airline is charging people for a premium experience and then allowing staff to discriminate based on their own narrow-minded biases. If she's doing this to me, the man who makes the wine, what is she doing to the kid in 14C who saved up his whole life for a first-class trip? What is she doing to the woman who doesn't have the status to speak up? Linda finally spoke. It wasn't an apology. It was a snarl. You think you're so special because you have a fancy title. You're just a man in a suit. I've been flying these routes for 30 years. I know how to do my job. Your job is to serve every passenger with the same level of dignity. I shot back. And if you've been doing it for 30 years, then you've had 30 years to learn that a person's value isn't tied to the color of their skin or the assumptions in your head. But clearly, you haven't learned a thing. Robert looked like he wanted to disappear. He knew the situation was spiraling out of his control. He reached for the bottle Linda was still clutching like a shield. He took it from her and looked at the label. He didn't say anything, but I saw his jaw tighten. It was exactly what I thought it was. The house wine from the back of the plane. Linda, go to the galley and stay there, Robert said. His voice was no longer smooth. It was cold. But Robert, now, he barked. She turned and fled, her heels clicking on the floor like a frantic heartbeat. I watched her go, and for a moment, I felt that old, familiar tightness in my chest. It's a feeling I've carried since I was 6 years old, and a shopkeeper followed me around a toy store, waiting for me to steal something I couldn't afford. It's a feeling of being hunted, even when you're the king of the jungle. I looked at the man in 1B. He had put his book down and was looking at me with wide eyes. He didn't look angry. He looked embarrassed. He looked like he'd just realized he was part of a scene he didn't want to be in. He took a sip of his wine, my wine, and I could see him realizing the weight of it. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Don't be sorry for me," I said to him. "Be sorry that this is the world we're still living in." Robert turned back to me, the bottle of cheap wine still in his hand. "Mr. Sterling, I am truly, deeply sorry. This is a catastrophic failure on our part. I will be filing a full report the moment we land. I will personally see to it that— I don't want your reports. Robert, I said, I want you to understand the damage that was done here. You see this glass? This isn't just wine. It's a symbol. It's a symbol of every time a person of color is told they aren't good enough, even when they're the best. And as the CEO of the company that supplies this airline, I cannot, in good conscience, continue to let my brand be associated with this kind of treatment. I stood up again. And this time, I didn't just feel tall, I felt powerful. But it was a heavy kind of power. The kind that comes with the responsibility to speak for those who can't. I looked at the galley curtain, where I knew Linda was hiding, probably already trying to come up with a story to save her job. I'm going to make a phone call when we land, I said to Robert. And it won't be to your customer service department. It will be to my legal team. We're going to review our partnership. Because if my wine is being used as a tool for discrimination, then your airline doesn't deserve to have it. Robert looked like I'd just punched him in the gut. He knew what that meant. Losing Sterling Legacy would be a PR nightmare, not to mention a huge blow to their premium image. We were the cornerstone of their luxury service. Please, Mr. Sterling, he pleaded. Let's talk about this. We can fix this. We can make it right. How? I asked. Can you go back in time and make her see me as a human being from the moment I stepped on this plane? Can you erase the look of disgust she had when she told me to go back to coach? Can you take back the lie she told about being out of the good stuff? He didn't have an answer, because there isn't one. You can't fix a broken soul with a free voucher or a bigger seat. You can't patch over a lifetime of little things that add up to one giant mountain of pain. I sat back down and closed my eyes for a moment. I could feel the hum of the plane in my bones. We were still miles above the earth, suspended in this metal tube, hurtling toward a destination that felt further away than ever. I thought about the board meeting I was supposed to have. I thought about the vines in Napa, waiting for the harvest. I thought about my father, who never got to see a day like this, who never got to stand up and demand what he was owed. I felt a tear prick at the corner of my eye, but I didn't let it fall. I didn't have the luxury of crying. I had to be strong. I had to be the CEO. I had to be the man who didn't back down. Robert was still standing there, holding that bottle of cheap wine like it was a piece of evidence. He didn't know what to do with himself. He was waiting for me to say something else, to give him a way out. But I had nothing left to give him. The silence in the cabin was heavy now, but it wasn't the awkward silence from before. It was a silence of reflection. I could see the other passengers looking at their own drinks, looking at each other, maybe for the first time, really seeing the invisible lines that had been drawn in the sand. I reached out and picked up the glass of thin, purple wine one last time. I didn't drink it. I just looked at it. It was so small, so insignificant, and yet it had the power to reveal the rot at the heart of everything. Take it away, Robert, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I don't want it on my table anymore. He nodded quickly, almost frantically. He took the glass and the bottle, and he hurried back to the galley. I was left alone in 1A, with the fading light of the sun and the empty tray table in front of me. I felt a strange sense of exhaustion. It was the kind of tired that sleep can't fix. It was a soul tiredness. I'd won the confrontation. Sure, I'd exposed the lie. I'd put them on notice. But at what cost? I just wanted to fly across the country and do my job. I just wanted to be a man on a plane, not a symbol of a struggle that never ends. I leaned my head back against the headrest and watched the stars start to peek through the darkening sky. They looked so cold, so distant, so untouched by the mess down here. I wished I could be up there with them, just for a little while, just long enough to forget the weight of the suit and the color of the dirt. But then I thought about my father again. I thought about the pride he would have felt seeing me stand up for myself. I thought about the workers at my vineyard, people from all walks of life, working together to make something beautiful. That's what I was fighting for. Not just for a glass of wine, but for the right to be seen, to be heard, and to be respected for the work of our hands. The plane tilted slightly, beginning its slow descent into the California night. I could feel the shift in pressure, the way the air seemed to push against the fuselage. We were coming down. I reached into my pocket and felt my phone. It was heavy, full of power. I thought about the people I needed to call. I thought about the message I wanted to send to the world. But first, I had to deal with what was right in front of me. Because the purser was coming back, and this time, he wasn't alone. He had someone with him, someone I hadn't seen since the boarding gate. And by the look on his face, this wasn't an apology tour. This was something else entirely. I took a deep breath, smoothing the fabric of my suit jacket. I felt the familiar steel in my spine return, the armor I'd built over 5 decades of being Marcus Sterling. I didn't know what was coming next, but I knew I was ready for it. I was always ready, because in this life, you don't get to be anything else. I looked at the curtain, waiting for it to open, my hands resting calmly on the armrests of my seat, fixed on the empty space where the confrontation was about to begin again. The heavy blue curtain separating the galley from the cabin didn't just slide open, it parted like a shroud, revealing a ghost from 45 minutes ago. Standing there, shadowed by the dim overhead lights of the service area, was the woman from the gate. Tiffany. She wasn't wearing her blazer anymore, just her white uniform shirt with the airline's logo embroidered over a heart I was starting to believe didn't exist. She was a deadheading employee, it turned out, hitching a ride to the West Coast for a shift change. And the look she gave me wasn't one of professional courtesy. It was a look of pure, unadulterated suspicion, the kind of gaze that usually precedes a random secondary search or a pair of handcuffs. Robert stepped aside, but he didn't look relieved. He looked like a man caught between a wildfire and a flood. Tiffany didn't wait for him to introduce her. She marched right up to my row, her eyes fixed on the leather portfolio I still had open on my lap. She didn't look at the business card. She didn't look at the expensive watch on my wrist. She looked at me like I was a smudge on a clean window. "Is there a problem with the documentation, Robert?" she asked, her voice projecting just loud enough for the passengers in the first 3 rows to hear. She was performing now. She was the hero of her own story, protecting the sanctity of first class from the intruder. I felt the heat rising again, but this time it wasn't just in my neck. It was in my marrow. It was that old, familiar burn of having to prove my birthright in a country I helped build. I thought back to my father, standing in that bank lobby at 2:00 a.m., his back aching from pushing a mop. He would look up at the portraits of the men on the wall, men who looked like the people in this cabin, and tell me, "Marcus, don't you ever let them see you sweat. Because the moment you sweat, they think they've found a crack in the foundation." Well, my foundation was solid stone, but the air in this cabin was getting thin. I looked at Tiffany, really looked at her. She wasn't just being mean. She was convinced she was right. That's the most dangerous kind of person. Brother? The one who thinks their prejudice is actually intuition or security protocol. "Tiffany," I said, my voice dropping into that deep, resonant tone I use when I'm about to fire a board member. "You had my ID in your hand for 3 minutes at JFK. You scanned my diamond medallion card. You saw the sterling global watermark on my digital profile. What exactly was the inconsistency? Was it the fact that my last name matched the wine on your menu? Or was it the fact that I didn't look like the picture you have in your head of a CEO? She didn't flinch. She leaned in, resting her hand on the back of the seat in front of me, invading my space in a way she would never dream of doing. To the man in 1B. People buy cards. Mr. Sterling. People print business cards. People even buy suits. But I've been doing this long enough to know when someone is trying too hard to fit in where they don't belong. The man in 1B, the one who had been sipping my Cabernet with a guilty conscience, finally spoke up. Ma'am, honestly, he's been perfectly polite. He's just pointing out that the wine is wrong. And he's right. I'm drinking the good stuff. And he's got purple water. Tiffany didn't even glance at him. Her focus was a laser beam aimed at my chest. We'll verify everything on the ground. Until then, Robert, I suggest we keep the service to a minimum for this row. We don't want to encourage any further disruptions. I looked at Robert. He was looking at the floor. He was a good man. Probably. But he was a man who valued his pension more than his principles. He was letting her take the lead because it was easier to deal with a problem passenger than a problem colleague. Robert, I said, my voice vibrating with a quiet power that made the ice in my neighbor's glass rattle. Look at me. He looked up, his eyes glassy. You are the purser of this aircraft. You are the ranking officer in this cabin. Are you going to allow an off-duty employee to harass a passenger because of a feeling she had at the gate? Or are you going to do your job and address the fact that your airline is currently in breach of its quality control contract with my estate? I reached into my briefcase again. This time, I didn't pull out a business card. I pulled out my tablet. I tapped the screen and pulled up the encrypted portal for Sterling Legacy Vineyards. I swiped through the documents until I found the 2026 distribution agreement, the one with the airline's logo at the top and my signature at the bottom. See this, Robert. I held the tablet up. This is the signature of your Chief Procurement Officer, David Vance. I was at his daughter's wedding last summer. We served the same Cabernet that Linda refused to pour for me tonight. You want to call him. You want to use the satellite phone in the cockpit and ask David if he thinks Marcus Sterling belongs in seat 1A. Tiffany tried to scoff, but it died in her throat as she saw the official seal of the airline on the digital document. Her eyes darted to the screen, then back to my face. For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt. It was a small flicker, like a candle in a hurricane, but it was there. That could be anything, she muttered, but the iron was gone from her voice. She was starting to realize she'd stepped onto a bridge that was already on fire. It's not anything, I said, leaning forward until I was just inches from her face. I could smell the stale coffee on her breath and the scent of the cheap industrial soap from the JFK lounge. It's my life's work. It's 20 years of 60-hour weeks. It's the dirt of Napa and the sun of the valley. It's the scraps my father told me never to accept. And right now, it's the reason your company is going to be spending the next 6 months in a deposition if you don't step back and apologize. The silence in the cabin was so heavy, it felt like the plane was descending, even though the altimeter on my screen still read 36,000 feet. I could hear the faint clinking of silverware from the galley, the sound of a baby crying 3 rows back, and the rapid, shallow breathing of the woman who had decided I was a criminal before she even knew my name. I thought about the wine again, the red blend she'd tried to pass off as my legacy. It's funny how a single glass of fermented grapes can hold so much weight. In my world, Wine is about terroir, the soul of the soil. It's about the struggle of the vine. If the vine has it too easy, the grape is weak. It has no character, no legs. But if the vine has to fight through the rock, if it has to dig deep for every drop of moisture, if it has to endure the heat and the frost, that's when it produces something legendary. I was that vine. I'd dug through the rock of the 80s in Brooklyn. I'd endured the frost of the 90s corporate ladder. I'd survived the heat of the Napa Old Boys Club. And here I was, being told by a gate agent that I was trying too hard to fit in. I wasn't trying to fit in. I was trying to be. I don't think you realize what you've done. Tiffany, I said, my voice softening, which somehow made it more terrifying. You didn't just insult a passenger. You exposed the rot in your own house. You showed me that all the diversity training and the inclusive marketing your airline puts out is just a thin veneer. Underneath, it's still the same old story. It's still the same gatekeeper at the same gate, wondering how the janitor's son got the key to the vault. She opened her mouth to speak, but Robert finally stepped in. He put a firm hand on her shoulder and physically moved her back a step. Tiffany, go back to your seat. Now, that is an order, he said. His voice was finally that of a purser. She looked at him, her eyes wide with shock. Robert, I'm just trying to go, he repeated. She glared at me one last time, a look of pure, concentrated venom, and then turned on her heel and disappeared back through the curtain. Robert turned to me. His shoulders slumped. He looked 10 years older than he had 10 minutes ago. Mr. Sterling, there are no words. I am sick to my stomach. I will be making the call to David Vance myself. I will report Tiffany, and I will report Linda. This is not who we are supposed to be. But it's who you were today, Robert, I said. And today is the only day that matters. I sat back, the adrenaline starting to fade, replaced by a cold, hollow ache. It's a lonely thing, being the one who has to hold up the mirror. It's a lonely thing being the first, or the only, or the owner. Everyone wants a piece of the success, but nobody wants to carry the weight of the suit. I looked at my tablet again. I saw a notification pop up, an email from my lead vintner in Napa. Harvest is looking exceptional. Marcus, the sugar levels are perfect. This might be the best year yet. I should have felt happy. I should have felt proud. But all I could think about was that thin, purple liquid sitting in the galley sink. I thought about how easy it was for them to try to swap the best year yet for the worst one ever, just because they didn't like the look of the man at the table. Can I get you anything, Mr. Sterling? Robert asked. He was hovering now, desperate to make amends. The actual Cabernet. A meal. Anything at all. I want to be left alone. Robert, I said, I want to finish this flight in silence. And I want the manifest for this flight printed and delivered to me before we land. I want the names of every crew member who handled the beverage service today. Of course, he said, nodding so hard I thought his head might fall off. Immediately, he retreated, leaving me in the quiet of the cabin. The man in 1B looked like he wanted to say something else, but he saw my face and decided against it. He turned back to his book, but I noticed he wasn't turning the pages anymore. I stared out the window at the darkness. We were crossing over the Rockies now, the jagged peaks hidden by the night. But I knew they were there. I knew the climb they represented. I reached out and touched the window pane. It was freezing cold, a reminder of the vacuum just inches away. I felt a vibration in my pocket. My phone. I pulled it out. It was a text from my daughter. Hey, Dad. Hope the flight is good. Can't wait to see you at the vineyard. Love you, I looked at that message for a long time. I thought about her. She's 21, full of fire and hope. She thinks the world is hers for the taking. And it should be. But I realized that if I didn't finish what I started today, she'd be sitting in a seat just like this 10 years from now, being told she didn't belong. She'd be the one being served the adequate wine while the world drank her vintage. I couldn't let that happen. I opened my laptop. The glow of the screen felt like a spotlight in the darkened cabin. I didn't open a spreadsheet. I didn't check the stock market. I opened a new document and began to type. T.O. Board of Directors. Airline name from Marcus Sterling. CEO. Sterling Global. Sterling Legacy. Vineyards. R.E. Immediate termination of partnership and notice of legal action. I wrote about the gate. I wrote about Linda. I wrote about the inconsistency of my existence. I wrote about the wine, not as a product, but as a promise that had been broken. My fingers flew across the keys. The clicking sound, a rhythmic percussion against the hum of the engines. Each word felt like a brick being laid, building a wall that they wouldn't be able to climb over this time. I was halfway through the third paragraph when I felt a presence beside me. I didn't look up. I assumed it was Robert with the manifest. I have the names you requested. Mr. Sterling, a voice said. But it wasn't Robert. It was Linda. I stopped typing. I kept my eyes on the screen. The air around her smelled like the red blend, sour and cheap. Set it on the tray, I said, my voice as flat as the horizon. I wanted to say something first. She whispered. I finally looked up. She wasn't crying. She looked angry. Not the I'm sorry kind of angry, but the you're ruining my life kind of angry. She was holding a piece of thermal paper, the crew manifest, but she was gripping it so hard it was wrinkling. You think you're so much better than us, she hissed, her voice low so the others wouldn't hear. You come in here with your money and your titles, and you expect us to bow down. But you don't know what it's like to work for a living. You don't know what it's like to deal with people like you every single day. People like me? I asked, a cold smile touching my lips. You mean people who pay your salary? People who provide the very products that make this airline premium? You know what I mean? She said, her eyes flashing. You're just a man who got lucky, and you're using that luck to hurt people who are just trying to get through their shift. You're going to get me fired, aren't you? No, Linda, I said, closing my laptop slowly. You got yourself fired the moment you decided that my skin color dictated the quality of my service. I'm just the one making sure you don't do it to anyone else. She leaned in closer, her face contorted. I've been with this airline for 32 years. I have a clean record. They won't fire me for a glass of wine. They'll give me a warning, and I'll be back on this route next week. And you'll still be the same man, looking for a fight in every shadow. I looked at her, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of pity. She was so small, so trapped in her own bitterness. She was a vine that had been grown in a dark room, twisted and sour, and she couldn't understand why anyone would want the sun. We'll see about that, I said. She dropped the manifest on my lap and walked away, her back stiff, her pride still intact like a suit of rusted armor. I picked up the paper. I read the names. Linda Miller, Tiffany Vance. Wait. I blinked. I read the second name again. Tiffany Vance. Vance. I looked at the tablet. Still open to the contract signed by David Vance, the chief procurement officer. I thought about the wedding I'd attended. I thought about the blonde bride in the white dress. I thought about the younger sister who had been a bridesmaid, the one with the sharps, pinched face, and the hair pulled back too tight. The room seemed to tilt. The inconsistency Tiffany mentioned at the gate. It wasn't about security. It was about recognition. She knew exactly who I was. She'd seen me at her sister's wedding. She'd seen me standing next to her father, laughing and drinking the best Cabernet in the world. And she'd hated every second of it. This wasn't just a random act of bias. This was personal. This was a family legacy of resentment, meeting my legacy of success at 36,000 feet. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I reached for my phone, my thumb hovering over David Vance's personal number. I looked at the names on the manifest, then back at the galley curtain, where Linda and Tiffany were undoubtedly whispering. The plane hit a pocket of turbulence. A sudden, jarring drop. The cabin lights flickered a sickly yellow before snapping back to a cold, sterile white as the aircraft groaned against the wind. That sudden drop, that hollow, stomach-turning plunge, wasn't just the weather. It felt like the universe was finally catching up to the mess in row 1. I gripped the armrests so hard I could feel the individual grains in the leather, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. But it wasn't the fear of falling that had me shaking. It was that name on the crumpled manifest. Tiffany Vance. It's a funny thing about names, isn't it? They're supposed to tell you who a person is, but sometimes they're just a mask for something much uglier. I looked at that thermal paper again. The ink slightly blurred from the humidity in the cabin. David Vance had talked about his daughter for 3 hours over a ribeye steak and a bottle of my 2018 Reserve. He'd told me she was finding herself, working her way up from the bottom of the airline industry to prove she didn't need his help. He'd beamed with pride, calling her his Spitfire. I remember thinking how lucky she was to have a father who believed in her that much. I remember wishing my own father, who died with calloused hands and a bank account that never saw 4 figures, could have seen me with that same kind of unburdened joy. But standing in that galley was no Spitfire. It was a woman who had used her father's shadow as a place to hide her own darkness. She didn't want to find herself. She wanted to find someone to look down on. And there I was, the perfect target. The turbulence smoothed out into a low, vibrating hum, but the air in the cabin stayed heavy. I could see Robert, the purser, hovering near the cockpit door. He looked like he'd aged a decade since we crossed the Mississippi. He kept glancing at me, then at the galley curtain, his hands twisting a cocktail napkin into a tight, white braid. He knew the bomb was ticking, but he didn't know I already had my hand on the detonator. I didn't call David Vance right away. I sat there and let the silence sit with me. I thought about the Sterling name. I chose that name for the vineyard because it meant excellent, genuine, and valuable. It was a promise I made to myself and to every person who ever told me I wasn't enough. My father's name wasn't Sterling. It was Jackson. But when I started the company, I wanted something that sounded like it had been there for 100 years. I wanted a name that commanded respect before I even walked into the room. And yet, here I was, Marcus Sterling, being treated like a vagrant who'd snuck into the banquet. I opened my laptop again. The cursor blinked at me, a steady, rhythmic heartbeat in the dim light. I finished the email to the board of directors. I didn't just mention the wine. I mentioned the names. I mentioned the inconsistency at the gate. I mentioned the specific violations of the vendor conduct agreement. Section 4. 2. Respectful engagement and non-discriminatory practices. I was thorough. I was clinical. I was the CEO they'd spent millions of dollars to partner with. Just as I was about to hit send, the curtain flicked open. It wasn't Robert. It was Linda. She was carrying a tray with a fresh bottle of Sterling Legacy, the real deal, and a clean glass. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked terrified. Her face was a mask of forced, trembling servitude. She reached my seat and set the glass down with a hand that was shaking so badly the crystal chimed. She began to pour the wine. The deep, violet-red liquid flowed into the glass, and the aroma hit me instantly. Black cherry, cedar, and that hint of vanilla that only comes from the French oak barrels I hand-select every spring. It was beautiful. It was mine. Mr. Sterling, she whispered, her voice cracking. I've brought the correct bottle. There was a logistical error in the galley. I'm so sorry. I didn't look at the wine. I looked at her. A logistical error. Linda, is that what we're calling it? Now. Yes, sir, she said, her eyes fixed on my shoes. I didn't realize. I shouldn't have assumed. You assumed I didn't know what I was drinking, I said. And you assumed that because I'm a black man, I wouldn't have the courage or the standing to call you out on it. You thought you could save the good stuff for people who look like you. That's not a logistical error. That's a character flaw. She didn't say anything. A single tear escaped and rolled down her cheek, leaving a streak through her heavy foundation. I wanted to feel bad for her. I really did. I'm a father. I'm a boss. And I know that people make mistakes. But this wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern. Where's Tiffany? I asked. Linda swallowed hard. She's in the rear of the cabin. Sir, she's not feeling well. I bet she isn't, I said. I picked up the glass of wine. I swirled it, watching the legs coat the glass. Thick, slow-moving tears of sugar and alcohol. It was a perfect vintage, a masterpiece of agriculture and patience. I took a sip, letting the tannins grip my tongue. It was bittersweet. Tell Tiffany to come here, I said. Sir, the purser said. I don't care what the purser said. I interrupted. Tell Tiffany that the man who signs her father's largest supply contract wants to have a word with her. Now. Linda turned and scurried away. I saw her disappear through the curtain, and a few seconds later, I heard muffled voices, arguing, hushed tones. Then, silence. I waited. 1 minute. 2. The fastened seatbelt sign chimed again. We were beginning our final descent into San Francisco. The ground was coming up to meet us, and I was ready for the impact. Tiffany finally stepped through the curtain. She'd put her blazer back on, trying to reclaim some of that authority she'd worn so confidently at JFK. But it was different now. The blazer looked too big for her. Her shoulders were hunched. She didn't look at me. She looked at the wine glass on my tray. You wanted to see me, she asked. Her voice was still sharp, but the edge was jagged, like a broken bottle. I wanted to ask you a question. Tiffany, I said. I leaned back, letting the luxury of the seat emphasize the distance between us. How's your father doing? David's a good man. We had dinner last month at the French Laundry. He spent most of the night talking about you. She flinched as if I'd struck her. Her face went from pale to a deep, bruised purple. You know, my father. I know him very well, I said. He's the reason your airline serves my wine. He's also the reason I'm sitting in this seat. Not because he gave it to me, I paid for it, but because he knows quality when he sees it. It's a shame he didn't pass that trait down to you. I was just doing my job, she said, her voice rising in a desperate pitch. The system flagged you? It wasn't personal. It was entirely personal, I said. You saw me at your sister's wedding. Tiffany, we were introduced. I was the one who provided the champagne for the toast. You remember that. Or did you flag that as an inconsistency? 2. She bit her lip, her eyes darting around the cabin. The man in 1B was leaning in now, his book completely forgotten. He was witnessing the dismantling of a legacy, and he couldn't look away. "You think you're so powerful?" she hissed, leaning down so only I could hear. "You think you can just buy your way into our world? But you'll always be a guest, Marcus. No matter how much wine you make, you're just a guest in a house we built." I felt a chill go through me. There it was, the naked truth. The thing they usually keep hidden behind smiles and security protocols. The belief that the world is a private club, and I'm just a guy who got a temporary pass. "The house you built is rotting, Tiffany," I said. "And the reason it's rotting is because of people like you. You don't build anything. You just guard the door. But here's the thing about doors. They can be unhinged." I picked up my phone. I didn't text. I didn't email. I hit the speed dial. It rang twice. "Marcus, is that you? It's nearly midnight on the East Coast." "Man, this better be about a new vintage." David Vance's voice boomed through the speaker. I'd put it on speakerphone on purpose. "Hello, David," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I'm sorry to wake you. I'm currently on Flight 442, about 30 minutes out from SFO. "Oh, fantastic. How was the flight? I hope the crew treated you like royalty. I told them you were coming." I looked up at Tiffany. She looked like she was about to vomit. Her hand was gripping the back of seat 1B so hard the plastic was creaking. "Actually, David, that's why I'm calling," I said. "There's been a bit of a situation. I was flagged at the gate by an agent who claimed my ID was inconsistent. Then, once I got on board, I was told by the flight attendant that the premium cabin was out of Sterling Legacy. They tried to serve me a house blend instead. It was quite a performance. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear David's breathing change. It went from jovial to that low, dangerous growl he uses during negotiations. They did what—" "Marcus, that's impossible. Who was the agent?" "I'll have their head." "The gate agent was your daughter, David," I said. The silence this time was absolute. It felt like the entire plane had stopped moving. Tiffany's eyes were huge, glassy with a mix of terror and disbelief. She looked like a child, caught in a lie she couldn't outrun. "Tiffany," David's voice was a whisper now, but it carried the weight of a mountain. "Tiffany was the one. She's standing right in front of me," I said, "and she just told me that no matter what I achieve, I'll always be a guest in your world. I thought you should know, because as much as I value our friendship, David, I can't let my brand be represented by people who think my presence is an inconsistency." "Give her the phone," David said. His voice was cold. It was the voice of a man who realized his Spitfire was actually a wildfire that had just burned down his house. I held the phone out to Tiffany. She didn't want to take it. She looked at it like it was a live grenade. But she took it. Her hand was shaking so much she almost dropped it. "Dad," she whispered. I couldn't hear what David said next, but I saw the effect. Tiffany's face crumbled. She didn't say a word. She just nodded, her eyes welling up with tears that finally looked like they were made of something real. Shame. She handed the phone back to me and fled. She didn't go to the galley. She ran toward the back of the plane, toward the main cabin she'd tried to banish me to. Robert came over then. He didn't ask if I wanted anything. He just stood there, his head bowed. "Mr. Sterling, we'll be landing in 15 minutes. There will be a company representative waiting for you at the gate. And I've been instructed to inform you that both Linda Miller and Tiffany Vance have been suspended effective immediately. Thank you, Robert, I said. I felt a strange lack of triumph. I just felt tired. I looked at the glass of wine. It was still half full. I picked it up and finished it in one long, slow swallow. It was the best wine I'd ever made, and it tasted like iron and ash. As the wheels touched down on the SFO tarmac, the screech of the rubber against the pavement felt like a scream I'd been holding in for 3,000 miles. We taxied to the gate in silence. The first-class cabin was quiet. Nobody was talking. Nobody was laughing. They were all just waiting to get off. I was the first one out. I walked out into the cool California air, and for the first time in 6 hours, I could breathe. There was a man in a dark suit waiting for me at the end of the jet bridge. "Mr. Sterling," he said, stepping forward. "My name is Thomas. I'm the regional manager. David Vance called me." "Save it, Thomas," I said, walking past him. "Tell David I'll see him at the vineyard tomorrow. We have a lot more than just wine to talk about." I walked through the terminal, my leather briefcase heavy at my side. I looked at the people passing by. I thought about my father again. I thought about the way he used to look at the sky, wondering what it was like to be above the clouds. He never got there, but I did, and I realized that the Sterling legacy wasn't just about the wine. It was about the fact that I was still standing. I was still here, and I wasn't going to let anyone, not even the daughter of a friend, make me feel like a guest in my own life. I stepped out into the night, the lights of San Francisco shimmering in the distance like a field of diamonds. Before I head to the vineyard, I want to leave you with a thought. Life is going to serve you some bitter vintages. People are going to try to swap your dreams for something cheap and watery. They're going to look at you and see a logistical error instead of a human being. But you have to remember who you are. You have to remember the soil you came from and the struggle that made you strong. Don't ever accept the scraps. Don't ever let them tell you that you're just a guest. This is your house. You built it, and you deserve to drink the best wine it has to offer. I'm heading out to the vines. Now, I need to see the grapes. I need to feel the dirt between my fingers. Because at the end of the day, that's the only thing that's real. The soul is in the wine. I want to know, have you ever had to stand up for yourself when everything seemed to be going against you? Have you ever had to prove you belonged in the room? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one of them. It keeps me going, knowing I'm not alone in this fight. And if you want to see more of this journey, if you want to hear more stories from the Sterling legacy, hit that subscribe button. We're just getting started. There's a lot more work to be done, and I'm glad to have you along for the ride. I looked back at the airport one last time. The giant silver planes looking like sleeping birds under the floodlights. I thought about Tiffany and Linda. I didn't hate them. I just hoped they finally understood that the man in 1A wasn't just a passenger. He was the owner. I got into the car, the door closing with a solid, expensive thud. The driver pulled away, and I watched the airport fade into the rearview mirror. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone one last time. I sent a text to my daughter. "Hey, baby. Just landed. Everything is okay. Always remember, your name is Sterling, and you don't owe anyone an explanation for why you're in the room. See you tomorrow. Love, Dad." I leaned my head back and closed my eyes, the hum of the road replacing the hum of the engines. I was home, and for the first time in a long time. The air felt exactly as thick as it was supposed to be. I reached out and touched the window, feeling the cool glass beneath my fingertips as we drove toward the valley, toward the sun, and toward the next harvest.